Hey everyone, welcome to Curious Out Loud. This is Tyge.
And this is Tiff.
We really appreciate you joining us today. Today we're going to be talking about community and what that means to us and to you and the implications of how community is defined.
Yeah, so first, let's find out who's with us for today's conversation. So if you're watching right now, I see Leo's on. What's going on, Leo? Just go ahead and comment community if you are watching right now. I want to see you. I first get to find this screen again. And Karen, hey Karen, what's going on? So if you're watching the replay, go ahead and say replay and participate just as if you would watching live. Karen, it's good to see you. And yeah, so as people are jumping on, go ahead and just say hi, comment community, comment replay, and we're happy to have you. What we're going to be talking about today is community. So I'm excited to have that. Yes, Karen.
Yeah, also, if you're joining us live, go ahead and put live in the comments. And if you're catching the replay, put replay so that we know how you're catching this video and so that we can continue the conversation after this video. So today we're introducing the topic of community. Tiff and I will be discussing some questions that have come up for us as we've explored this topic. Now, it's important to note that I'm not positioning myself as an expert here. Rather, I have a genuine curiosity about what community or about what connects us and how we interact and relate with that connection. I certainly can't speak for the gay or queer populations at large, nor can I speak at all for the experience of Black, Indigenous people of color. I can only represent my own experience within this community. So that's what I'll be bringing to the conversation today. We're hosting these conversations. It's really important to us to hear the voice of the community and to get input from the community. Because like I said, we're not positioning ourselves as the experts here. We really want to be in conversation with you.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And so when Tyge brought this topic up to me yesterday, we have been in conversation about community for a long time, what that means. And so kind of sparked something in me about this. And I want you to kind of explain to our community what you said about the definition about community. And then I'm going to share a little bit about my feelings about what came up for me about that.
Yeah, so it was specific to the LGBTQIA plus community. And it's an idea that was actually introduced to me newly. I was speaking to my friend Judy about a week ago, and we were talking about, this idea of community, what makes the LGBTQIA plus a community and stuff. And she said to me, well, I think first we have to talk about whether we even want to be a community, because this is a community of people defined by who we are not rather than by who we are. And that really struck me as an interesting perception. And I've been sitting with that for the past week. I've really put a lot of thought into that, and I've explored that. And I think that certainly feels true for the beginning of the community. Like if you look back to how the community began, I think that there's a lot of truth to that the community was established by who we were not as opposed to by who we are. And for the younger generations, for younger people within the community, I think that it's likely they have a different experience. But I think it's also important to remember how this community came about, because I think it's incredibly important how the community is defined and who's defining it in terms of how we connect, interact with each other, how we relate to one another. Because there's a different type of relatedness if we're put into community because somebody says who we're not, as opposed to choosing community based on who we are and who we are to one another.
Yeah, so I think that the distinctions that you're making in terms of generations is really important, and that Tyge and I come from different generations in terms of, and one of the reasons why I felt comfortable to come out when I did in a really formal and big way was because the generation before me, like Tyge and my mentors and things that I saw, made it possible in just seeing. So someone once said, like, children cannot be what they cannot see. And so the fact that I was able to see people, adults living successful, creative, joyous lives as LGBTQIA openly, that provided like an example that like, oh, this is possible for me. And so when I heard what Tyke said about, a community being defined by what we're not and not what we are, I was really struck by that at first. I was like, whoa, that's feels yucky. Like it doesn't feel good. Like I don't feel good about that. And then I have, learned a lot about the LGBT community, about trans people of color, about the movements that have taken place before I was born to make it possible for me to live the life I currently live out in the open. And so I definitely see that. And I was talking to my partner the other night about how when I was growing up, I knew I was gay, but before I knew I was gay, I knew I was different. And so it kind of made that relationship to like what we're not, because I knew that I didn't have the same feelings that people had about the opposite sex. I knew that I didn't feel like this urge to grow up and like get married to a man and like have children with a man and like all this stuff. So like I knew what I wasn't. And so that's what I started to process. And so before I knew I was gay, I knew that I didn't fit in. And then until I knew it was possible to live as like a lesbian woman, because I thought in my mind that you had to be trans. Like this is me processing my childhood, like that you had to be trans in order to be with a woman. So I knew I didn't like boys. And then I was like, wait, what do I have to, maybe I have to be a boy in order to like a girl because that's all I've seen. So I actually had no exposure until I was about 18 years old to openly gay people living their lives and like having partnerships with the same sex and things like that. So I just didn't see it was possible. And then when I realized that it was possible to be a woman and still be with a woman, then I was like, oh, then there's that. And so I'm kind of taking you through my journey of like what kinds of communities I didn't have and what I did have. So I can see where like communities can be created because what we're not, because there's a mainstream like way to behave and a mainstream lifestyle. And then there are pockets of that and trying to figure out what that means. And so definitely though the generational differences, because it was much less transparent and open to be who I am right now 20 years ago than even 10 years ago. So that's how I'm processing it.
You said a lot there, a lot to unpack. One thing that really stands out to me is what you said about children can't become what they can't see. And that really highlights for me why it's so important for us to have representation, for us to have healthy representation, rather than stereotypical representation in media, in children's books, in children's media. I've done a lot of research about the importance of children seeing themselves represented and being able to recognize themselves in the media. And I think it's such an important conversation, and an important enough conversation to have a whole topic on this. So I don't really want to go down a rabbit hole with there, but that was so profound for me, the way that you said that. And then you said you knew you were different before you knew you were gay. And that's so interesting because I had the exact same experience. I definitely knew that I was different long before I knew what that meant. I didn't have a label for it. In fact, when somebody gave me a label for it, I remember the very first time someone told me I was gay. I remember where I was standing, what I was wearing, what the moment was. It's like this frozen picture in time in my mind, because it was so impactful for me that for the first time in my life, someone was putting a label to the otherness that I felt my whole life. And that was really interesting. I remember a conversation that you and I had with one of our guests, Debbie, which we'll be releasing that interview in the next couple of weeks, which I'm excited about. But I remember Debbie referring to these labels and saying, we use these labels as a way to gain freedom. And what we don't realize is that by taking on these labels, we're just putting ourselves in a new type of prison. And I'm paraphrasing, that I don't think that's what she said exactly, but she talked about how the feeling of otherness and freeing, like as a way of liberating ourselves, we take on these various labels, the LGBTQIA labels as a way of liberation, and thinking that we're launching ourselves into community, and then getting there and realizing that it's not necessarily what we thought it was, and finding ourselves in new constraints by these labels. And that to me is so interesting. It's so interesting in terms of how we define community, who's making that definition, who's defining that, because I think it's so important in how we relate to one another. And why community is important to begin with, because much like Debbie expressed how important that liberation was for her, when I came out, my relationship with my family became unsustainable. And so I lost all the community that I could relate to. I lost my family. I lost the church community that my family was a part of. I lost all of that. And so I really looked to the gay community to bring me in and to create community for me. And much like Debbie explained in her experience, my experience of that was mixed emotions. For the first time, I felt like I was home, but there was also this dichotomy of also realizing really quick that I was just in a new community where I was labeled, where I was categorized. The prevalence of racism became very clear to me. I don't know how it is for the other sub-communities of this community. I can only speak to my experience with the gay community, but I saw very quickly how racist the gay community is, how much homophobia there is, how much ageism, how much misogyny, like there's just all of these modes of oppression. And what I realized is that the gay community specifically, because that's my experience, but I'm going to make a broader generalization here, that the LGBTQIA plus community is a microcosm for what's happening in our world, and seems to be magnified as being that microcosm. And I feel like we have such a responsibility to take a look at that as a community and look at how we perpetuate oppression, because I really do believe the statement that I absolutely love that I brought up last week by Angela Davis, where she said, these modes of oppression serve to prop one another up. And so if we're fighting for equality, if we're fighting not to be oppressed, we have to look within the community of how we oppress one another in order to truly make progress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally hear that. And I definitely have seen that myself. And what's coming up for me about this is that, like, to be othered from the mainstream culture or what's happening, and to be othered for the fact of being gay, and then being and then in like finding the gay community where we get to, there's a piece of us that feels at home, and maybe we feel hole there. And I want to hear from you in the comment section how you felt when you've, found your chosen family, because most often the LGBTQIA create family out of necessity for not being accepted in their own family, and that may not be the case for everyone. And so it's just the way that I visualize being propped up, and it's the same thing as like racism. It's like I'm better than the other, we're better than the other, we have these better traits, and like, and there's like pride, and there's straight up racism. It's like, and so to make those distinctions clear, but also I've noticed that when people are othered, they do find other ways to prop themselves up, because in the hierarchy of life, because there is one that we're functioning under, that we've grown up in, that layer of hierarchy placed upon us is like, okay, how can I prop myself up in society to make up for the otherness? Like, the not even being invisible in one community and then being visible in this community now, and now playing with that hierarchy here. So like, that's why those modes of oppression oppress. And so being conscious of that is amazing. But I also do think that we're rapidly transforming as a people in the world, due to social media and like technology, and every generation is becoming more and more open. I mean, I thought I was like young, and then I'm driving Lyft one day in college. I'm driving Lyft, and I for fun, and these high school kids jump in, and they're completely like, completely threw me off guard, because they don't even label themselves anymore. So we got to a point where kids in high school are talking about sexual encounters and stuff with same sex and everything. And then I told them it was Valentine's Day, I was going to go see my girlfriend at the time, and they were like it just, I was talking to them about it, and they just they don't even label. They're like, whatever, you can like whoever you want to like it doesn't even matter. And I'm like, that blew my mind, because I made the last 10 20 years of my life making it matter enough so that I could live my life in this way.
Right. The thing that really strikes me about that I think is so important to mention, I'm in New York City currently. You're in LA. I lived in Southeast Europe for a couple of years. It's really, for me, it's really easy to live in New York City and to think we've made so much progress, which we have. There's no denying that we've made progress, but it's easy for me to sit in New York City and think the rest of the country has a shared experience of New York City, that the rest of the world has a shared experience. But certainly there are huge parts of this country that don't have the experience of the openness that is experienced in New York City. Mm-hmm. And there's still a lot of shitty things that go on in New York City. You know what I mean? As open as it is, as big as the city is, there's still a lot of oppression here and a lot of stuff that happens here. But certainly it's night and day difference from when I was growing up. Mm-hmm. And it's so easy for me to forget that my experience in this city is drastically different from the experiences of others, even in this country, and certainly of others throughout the world. I mean, there are still countries where you're tortured and killed if people find out that you're gay. And that, I think, is so important to bring to the forefront and to be reminded of, because as a movement, we are making so much progress. And I feel like it's important, if we call ourselves community, to be able to look back and not leave people behind and forget that this fight isn't just our fight, that this is a movement, that we're on a quest of equality so that all people can live fully expressed versions of themselves throughout the world in peace and in safety.
Yeah, for sure. And what's standing out to me the most about this conversation is going back to the fundamental ideas of I'm better. or what makes me better, like what makes me special, not really what makes me unique, which is different, but like what makes us special, what makes me special, and how we find belonging. So Heather and I were talking about like throwing rocks at our enemies and how that creates community. And that's something that I've taught because it works in terms of telling a story and like hero. But I'm like, isn't it interesting that in order to become a community, there has to be someone you're fighting against? Like that to me is the root, I think, of all discrimination, is like the idea that we have to have enemies in order to become not enemies per se, not always enemies, but we have to be other than someone else to be a community.
Yeah, and you totally called me out on my language, right? Because I actually caught myself as I was saying it, that we're fighting for equality. And, as I was researching for this episode, as I was typing up my notes for this episode, I remember consciously being aware of my language. And I originally put, this is our fight for equality, or actually it was a comment. It was a comment on social media that I was commenting. And I said, it's important to remember those who've contributed to the fight for our equality. And I went back and I changed it to the quest for equality, because I think that languaging is so important. The moment we use the language of the other, then we further define ourselves as the other. And it's such an interesting thing to notice as it happens, and how it really tints the whole conversation.
I think there gets to be, in my mind, what now has become illuminated is that there gets to be a rewiring of what brings humans closer together. Because as I've seen in history and history books and what we're taught and all this stuff, like how I built my business, is like we band together when there's a crisis. We band together, and tribalism and everything is for survival. And so the way that we've chosen community is out of survival rather than out of thriving. And so if we rewire the way that we search for community and create community as a human being, to focus on belonging to one another, not for the sake of survival, but for the sake of being together. Like, I don't know how effective that's going to be, because I've now have eliminated myself to the fact that I've only been taught to find modes of survival in community. Right. So I'm kind of mind blown right now about that, and like finding ways now, how can I rewire my brain so that I'm not looking to protect myself at all times, rather I'm looking to share.
Right. And to me, this conversation takes me back to the original conversation of who is defining us as community. Are we community because we choose to be community out of shared experiences? Or are we community because somebody says we're community because of who we're not? And I think that is such an important distinction in terms of how we relate to one another, how we connect with one another. I actually
it's possible that it could be both. It's possible that it's all of those things. It's so complex, and what each of us are actually searching for when it comes to community.
Which is exactly why this is an introduction to this topic. We really want to hear what you in the community has to say about this. We want to hear your voices. We want to host these conversations. Like I said when we began, we are not at all positioning ourselves as the experts here. These are genuine questions, genuine curiosities that we have, that we're trying to figure out for ourselves as we do this. I do want to bring attention to the responses that we did get from some of our community members, because I did post a question earlier a few days ago asking, what is community to you? And I want to highlight those. First, in response to the welcome post, one of my friends, Deanna Thomas, said, thank you for creating this beautiful, safe space for us to explore what it means to not be straight. And I thought that was so interesting, considering what we're talking about, right? And Deanna is someone who I met briefly years and years and years ago. I met her in Seattle when I was out there with my adopted family who kind of took me under their wings once I separated from my birth family for some time. And I was so impacted by her genuine kindness and have continued to follow her through social media and have been impacted, even though we don't have like this tight, intimate friendship where we spent lots of time together. I feel like she is someone who's really impacted me and impacted my journey because of her passion and her commitment to advocate and to be a stand. And so I'm really glad that she's here and that she's a part of this community. But I asked the question, what does community mean to you? And Karen said it means your tribe existing peacefully, living respectfully, and with common harmonious goals. And I love that. I love all of that. Judy said coming towards unity, which I really love. And then Tina commented and she said to commune together in unity. I think it is sometimes new now as we embark on a trail of true acceptance of differences, but with total respect. I have been challenged lately with my faith, so I get to work diligently to acknowledge anything that creates separation. I feel strongly that we are on the cusp of acknowledging that we are all connected. With that knowledge, there will be true power. And I love that. Tina is another dear friend of mine, and she's here as an ally. She's here to be a strong ally in the community and to stand up, you know, as as an ally in the community. It's so interesting. The reason I pause, I'm remembering the conversation you and I originally had about this when we were trying to figure out what all the letters of LGBTQIA plus means. And I remember saying to you, every time I look, there's a new letter added and I don't even feel like I can keep up with what's going on. And so it's interesting how more and more people keep coming into the fold of our community. And I think that it also changes the way that we relate to one another.
Yeah, I hear the focus on separation. I know that we're at the 30-minute mark right now. And so, but I just want to say that I think we are moving towards a place with the comments being said on the post from your colleagues and friends about unity and about separation and about how we're moving away from that and into oneness. And what I'm experiencing right now is like the embrace of people trying to first, I think Debbie's call is going to be really great for this when we release it, because we talk about the journey of like first the liberation of finding something that feels like, okay, I've been othered my whole life and now I feel like this, and this label like actually like feels like me, and then breaking away from that and then finding your true self yet again. And this journey of finding one's true self is transformative, and communities like ours can support that if we focus on the unity aspect rather than the separation aspect. But I do appreciate all of the letters. Like, I don't know if I'm intimidated by the different letters that are coming up, because I think people are finding very varied ways to distinguish how they feel, maybe because it's not represented as much as they would like it to see. So I'm curious to see what this all brings up. And I feel like in my lifetime, I'll get to see the oneness that can occur in our community.
Absolutely. I'm excited for that too. And I'm excited to see where this conversation goes and to see what comes up for our community members in terms of community, how we define community, how we build community, how we stand for one another, because I know that for both of us, that's really our mission and why we want to do this, so that we can stand for one another as strong allies and move forward as a community.
Yes, yes. So again, we'd love to hear from you. Put in the comments section what your thoughts are, what your feelings are, what you're experiencing. And eventually we want to include you in live conversations, pull you in, put you in these boxes with us so that we can describe our boxes to each other.
Absolutely. Yeah, we definitely want to have you be a part of that conversation going forward. So for now, we're going to sign off because we want to keep these live streams to around 30 minutes. And we just want to remind you to stay curious. Thanks for coming and listening to us today.